In every family, there are bonds meant to last a lifetime. Bonds built on sacrifice, love, and trust. Yet sometimes, those very bonds are tested not by strangers, but by the people closest to us. This is the story of Margaret Hayes, a widowed mother who gave her youth and strength to raise her three children in a small town in Ohio, USA. Through hardship and loneliness, she endured, believing her love would be enough to guide them toward compassion and gratitude. But love can be forgotten when greed whispers too loudly. Instead of cherishing their mother, Margaret's children begin to see her as a burden and worse, as an obstacle standing between them and the inheritance they believe is theirs. Egged on by jealous relatives and fueled by pride, they betray the very woman who once carried them through sleepless nights and hungry winters. What begins with sharp words soon erupts into bitter conflict. Margaret, frail in body but strong in spirit, is forced to confront her own children, and in doing so, she uncovers a truth that will change everything. The Hayes farmhouse sat on the outskirts of Maplewood, Ohio, its wooden beams weathered by decades of storms and summers. The white paint had peeled to gray, and the once bustling garden now struggled against weeds. Yet to Margaret Hayes, this home was more than wood and stone. It was the last. Margaret was 67 now. Her hair, once chestnut brown, had faded into a soft silver, and her body carried the quiet aches of time. But each morning she rose before dawn, brewed a pot of coffee, and whispered the same prayer at the window overlooking the fields. "Help me keep this home, Robert. Help me keep them together." Her three children had long since grown, yet the ties of family and the promise of inheritance still tethered them to the farmhouse. The eldest, James Hayes, was a man of 42, living in the city with his ambitious wife. He worked in real estate, always chasing bigger contracts, bigger paychecks. James visited the farmhouse often, but not out of love. His eyes lingered on the land, measuring its worth, calculating its profit. To him, his mother was not a woman who had sacrificed her life for him, but a stubborn obstacle blocking his path to wealth. The middle child, Anna, 38, carried herself with bitterness. Divorced, living in an apartment she could barely afford, she wore her envy like a second skin. Each time she entered the farmhouse, her gaze swept across the furniture, the paintings, the cabinets not as heirlooms, but as assets waiting to be divided. And then there was Michael, the youngest at 32. He was quiet, often called aimless by his siblings. He worked odd jobs, cared little for appearances, and spent most of his time near the farmhouse. While James and Anna saw only what they could inherit, Michael still saw a home. One chilly morning in late October, Margaret was sweeping the porch when James's car pulled into the drive. He stepped out in a tailored coat, his shoes polished so brightly they looked foreign against the muddy gravel. "Mother," James said briskly, barely meeting her eyes, "we need to talk." Margaret leaned on her broom. "Good morning to you too, James. Won't you come inside?" He followed her in, immediately wrinkling his nose at the old curtains and the faint scent of wood smoke. "This house is too much for you," James began without preamble. "It's falling apart. You should sell it. Move into something smaller, safer." Margaret poured him coffee into the chipped mug Robert had once favored. She placed it before him gently. "This house is my home, James. I've lived here nearly 50 years. I'm not ready to let it go." James's jaw tightened. "You're being sentimental. Do you realize how much this land is worth? With the market rising, we could sell for $500,000, maybe more. Anna and I could make sure the money is invested properly." "Anna and you?" Margaret asked softly. "And what of Michael?" James scoffed. "Michael? He can't even hold a steady job. What do you think he'd do with money? Waste it. At least Anna and I would put it to good use." Margaret's voice remained calm, but her hands trembled slightly. "James, your father built this house for us, for our family. It is not for sale." That afternoon, Anna arrived. Her sharp heels clicked against the worn wooden floor. She looked around and sighed dramatically. Mother, honestly, these curtains, this furniture, it's embarrassing. Don't you ever think about how people see you? Margaret forced a smile. They serve me well enough, Anna scoffed. You could have so much more. If you sold this place, you could live in comfort, a new condo maybe. You wouldn't have to work yourself to death, sweeping porches and baking bread. Margaret shook her head. I don't need a condo. I need my home. Anna rolled her eyes. You're impossible. You've always been impossible. No wonder James says you can't be reasoned with. Later that evening, Michael returned from the fields with dirt on his hands and boots. He saw his mother sitting alone at the kitchen table, her shoulders slumped. Rough day? He asked gently, placing a hand on hers. Margaret nodded. Your brother and sister think I should sell the house. Michael's jaw tightened. Of course they do. They see dollar signs, not family. Don't let them bully you, Mother. This house is yours. You've earned the right to live here until your last breath. Tears pricked Margaret's eyes, but she smiled faintly. Thank you, Michael. At least someone still remembers what this house means. That night, after her children had gone, Margaret sat by the fireplace with her journal. She wrote slowly, the ink trembling under her weary hand. I gave them everything. My years, my strength, my love. Yet to them, I am not a mother but a gatekeeper. They see not the home that held their childhood, but a treasure chest to be unlocked. If Robert were here, he would scold them, but he is not, and so it falls to me to endure. I will not let go of this home, not while I still breathe. She closed the journal and placed it beside her bed. The farmhouse creaked in the quiet night, as though it too had vowed to endure. But deep in her heart, Margaret knew this was only the beginning. James and Anna would not stop, and soon the storm would break. 2 weeks later, the chill of November settled into Maplewood. The fields around the Hayes farmhouse lay bare, the last of the leaves scattered across the yard. Margaret bundled herself in a wool shawl as she walked to town for groceries. Her pace was slow, but her heart was steady. She still carried herself with quiet dignity, though whispers followed her wherever she went. At the corner store, Mrs. Doyle, the grocer's wife, greeted her with a strained smile. Good morning, Margaret. Cold day, isn't it? Margaret smiled warmly. It surely is. But as she turned to collect a sack of flour, she caught the sound of two women whispering by the shelves. She really should sell that old house, one murmured. Yes, the other agreed, her voice low but sharp. I heard James and Anna say it's falling apart. She's too old to manage it. Selfish, really, holding on to it when her children could use the money. Margaret's hands tightened on the sack of flour, but she said nothing. She lowered her head, finished her shopping, and walked home in silence. That evening, James arrived again, his frustration sharper than before. He didn't knock, he simply strode into the kitchen where Margaret was kneading bread. Mother, he began, tossing his coat over a chair, this has gone on long enough. Everyone in town sees it. You're clinging to a wreck of a house. People talk, and frankly, it's embarrassing. Margaret set down the dough, wiping her hands on her apron. Embarrassing for whom, James? For me, or for you? For all of us, he snapped. Do you want people to think the Hayes family is too blind to make smart decisions? We could sell that property tomorrow, and Anna and I could finally build the lives we deserve. Margaret's eyes flashed. The lives you deserve? And what of the life I built? This house is not just wood and land, James. It is the memory of your father. It is the cradle of your childhood. James leaned across the table, his voice low, cold. Memories don't pay bills. Nostalgia doesn't secure a future. Sell the house, Mother, before you drive us all into ruin. 2 days later, Anna arrived, dragging Margaret into the church foyer after Sunday service. People milled about, shaking hands, chatting over coffee, when Anna raised her voice just enough for others to hear. Mother, you can't keep living like this, she said sharply. You're one fall away from disaster. Don't you think it's unfair to expect us to pick up the pieces when you finally collapse? You should sell the house now, while you still can. A few heads turned. Mrs. Doyle, the pastor's wife, frowned with concern. Margaret felt her cheeks burn as whispers spread through the congregation. Anna, she said softly, trying to guide her daughter aside. This is neither the time nor the place. Anna pulled her hand away. It's exactly the place. Maybe if you listened to reason instead of clinging to the past, we wouldn't have to do this publicly. Margaret's voice trembled, but she stood firm. I will not be shamed in the house of God. This conversation ends now. She walked out of the church, her shoulders trembling beneath her shawl, while the murmurs of judgment followed her into the cold. That night, Michael found her sitting by the fire, her journal open on her lap. Tears shimmered in her eyes as the flames flickered against her face. They humiliated you again, didn't they? Michael asked, kneeling beside her. Margaret closed the journal. Yes. And the worst part is, the people listened. They think I'm selfish. They think I'm a foolish old woman who can't let go. Michael's jaw tightened. They don't know the sacrifices you made. How many nights you went without food so we could eat. How you worked yourself ragged after father died. They forget too easily. Margaret reached for his hand. You remember. That is enough. But Michael shook his head. It's not enough. They shouldn't treat you this way. James and Anna are poisoning everything, even your good name. The following week, James and Anna returned together. They sat across from Margaret at the kitchen table, their expressions grim. We've spoken to a lawyer, James said flatly. Margaret's stomach turned cold. A lawyer? Yes, Anna added. You're not thinking clearly. We're prepared to file for guardianship. If the court agrees you're unfit to manage the property, they'll transfer the rights to us. Then we can finally do what's best for everyone. Margaret's hands trembled against the edge of the table. Unfit? Because I wish to live in my home? Because you're stubborn, James retorted. Because you refuse to see reason. You can't keep house, you can't manage land, and you're dragging us all down with you. The court will see it. Margaret's eyes filled with tears, but her voice remained steady. The court may decide what it wishes, but the truth will remain. You are not protecting me. You are destroying me. That night, she wrote again in her journal. They plot to strip me of my home, my dignity, my voice. They would paint me as weak, unfit, broken all so they may profit. Yet they do not see that strength does not lie in wealth, but in love. If Robert were here, he would stand beside me. Since he cannot, I must stand alone. She set down her pen and closed the book, her heart heavy. But even as fear pressed upon her, a spark of resolve flickered within. They think I am weak, she whispered into the empty room. But they will learn I am far stronger than they know. Winter crept over Maplewood with a quiet ferocity. Snow draped the farmhouse roof in a heavy blanket, and icicles hung like crystal daggers from the eaves. Margaret Hayes kept the fire burning through the nights, her old hands stiff from chopping kindling when Michael was away. She moved more slowly these days, but her determination remained unchanged. Her peace, however, was fragile. Every knock at the door, every phone call, carried with it the dread of another confrontation. One morning, she opened her mailbox to find a thick envelope stamped with a lawyer's insignia. Her heart pounded as she tore it open at the kitchen table. Inside was a formal letter. James and Anna Hayes had filed a petition for guardianship. They sought control over her finances and property, claiming she was no longer capable of making responsible decisions. Margaret's hand shook as the paper slipped to the floor. Unfit, she whispered, the word cutting deeper than any insult her children had spoken aloud. Later that day, James appeared at the farmhouse, snow crunching beneath his polished boots. He stepped inside without waiting for an invitation. You received the notice, I assume, he said coldly. Margaret faced him from her chair by the fire, the letter clutched in her hand. You would drag your own mother into court? James didn't flinch. It's for your own good. Anna and I can manage things better than you. You can't keep this place up, Mother. You're too old. It's time to let go. Her eyes burned with tears, but her voice was steady. Too old? I kept this house running when your father died and left me with nothing but debts. I worked through sickness, through hunger, through grief, and now you would take from me the only thing I have left? James's lips tightened. You're clinging to the past. Think of the future. The future, she said sharply, is built on the sacrifices of the past. Do not forget who gave you everything you have. That Sunday, Anna escalated the humiliation. At church, while Margaret sat quietly in the pew, Anna leaned in to whisper loudly enough for others to hear. She's not well, Anna said to Mrs. Doyle. She forgets things, leaves the stove on. We're worried she'll hurt herself. James and I are only trying to protect her. Margaret's head snapped up, shame flooding her cheeks as she felt the eyes of the congregation turn on her. She wanted to protest, to defend herself, but her throat tightened and no words came. When the service ended, she walked out in silence, her dignity bruised but unbroken. That evening, Michael returned from town to find her sitting alone in the kitchen, her journal unopened before her. They've gone too far, he said after she told him what had happened. To lie about you like that, it's unforgivable. Margaret's eyes glistened. They are my children, Michael. I carried them, I raised them. I cannot understand how love can wither into this kind of cruelty. Michael placed a hand on hers. Love doesn't die, Mother. Greed strangles it. But I swear to you, I won't let them take this house. I won't let them take you. As the weeks passed, the gossip in Maplewood grew sharper. Neighbors who once admired Margaret now looked at her with pity or suspicion. At the market, conversations would hush when she walked by. Some offered polite smiles, others whispered behind her back. She's slipping, one man muttered. Her kids are right, another agreed. It's dangerous for someone her age to be living alone. Margaret kept her chin high, but inside her heart ached. Each word, each sideways glance, felt like another betrayal, not just by her children, but by the community she had given her life to. One evening, as snow battered the windows, James and Anna returned together. They sat across from Margaret at the kitchen table, their faces hard. We're only giving you one more chance, James said. Sign the papers to sell the house. We'll handle the rest. And if I refuse? Margaret asked quietly. Then the court decides, Anna snapped. And when they rule in our favor, you'll have no choice. Better to give in gracefully than to be dragged through the mud. Margaret studied their faces, searching for any trace of the children she once knew. The boy who used to run through the fields. The girl who once clung to her skirts. But all she saw were strangers. She rose slowly, her hands trembling but her voice firm. This house will not be sold, not by my hand, not while I still breathe. You may strip me of dignity in court, you may spread lies in town, but you will not take my home. Her children stared at her, anger flashing in their eyes. Without another word, they stormed out, the slam of the door rattling the windows. That night, Margaret opened her journal once more. Her hand shook as she wrote, I feel the walls closing in. My children plot against me. My neighbors judge me. And yet I remain here, in the house Robert built. I will not yield. They believe me weak, but they have forgotten I survived when the world was harsher than this. I will survive them, too. She set down the pen and closed her eyes, whispering into the silence. Hold me steady, Robert. The storm is breaking. The courtroom in Maplewood was small, its wooden benches polished by decades of restless hands. On the morning of the hearing, Margaret sat quietly in the front row, her shawl pulled tightly around her shoulders. Beside her, Michael sat tall, jaw clenched in anger, determined to defend her. Across the aisle, James and Anna sat with their attorney, whispering smugly. They looked polished, confident, as if the outcome had already been written. James met Margaret's gaze briefly, his eyes hard, then turned away without a word. When the judge entered, the room hushed. The proceedings began quickly. Your Honor, James's attorney began smoothly. My clients, James and Anna Hayes, are here because they love their mother. They're deeply concerned for her well-being. Mrs. Hayes is elderly, forgetful, and living in unsafe conditions. We fear she may cause herself harm if left unattended. Our petition is simple. Grant guardianship to her children, so they may act in her best interests. Margaret's chest tightened. She wanted to shout, to declare her strength, but the weight of their lies pressed against her like chains. Michael rose to speak on her behalf. His voice trembled at first, but grew stronger with every word. My mother is not unfit, he said firmly. She has lived in that house for nearly 50 years. She cooks, cleans, and keeps her life in order without help from anyone except me, when she asks. She isn't a burden. She isn't weak. She's the strongest person I know. The only reason James and Anna want guardianship is so they can sell the property and profit from it. The attorney smirked. That's an accusation, not evidence. But Michael pressed on, his voice rising. If this is truly about love, then why do they slander her in town? Why do they humiliate her at church? Why do they treat her with cruelty instead of kindness? This isn't love, it's greed. Whispers rippled through the courtroom. The judge called a recess. Margaret and Michael stepped outside into the cold air, her hands trembling in his. They've twisted everything, she whispered. They've turned my love into their weapon. Michael squeezed her hand. Don't lose hope, Mother. People are watching. The truth has a way of breaking through lies. But Margaret wasn't so sure. Later that evening, she returned to the farmhouse. Alone by the fire, she read the court documents again. The language stung, incapable of sound judgment, unsafe living conditions, potential harm to herself. She closed her eyes, whispering to the empty room. How did it come to this, Robert? The children we raised with love now treat me like a burden. Did I fail them, or did they fail me? In town, the rumors grew louder. At the grocery store, Mrs. Doyle avoided her eyes. At the post office, two men muttered just loud enough for her to hear. She should just sell the place. What's she hanging on for? Stubborn old pride, that's all. Margaret walked home with her chin high, but her heart sank lower with every step. That Sunday, she nearly stayed home from church, but Michael insisted. You belong there, Mother. Don't let them push you into hiding. Reluctantly, she went. Yet the moment she stepped into the foyer, the whispers began. Anna stood near the coffee table, her voice carrying across the room. She left the stove on last week, Anna told Mrs. Doyle. Michael caught it just in time. Imagine if he hadn't. The house could have burned down. She's lucky she hasn't killed herself already. It was a lie, but the congregation believed it. Margaret felt their pitying eyes pierce her like daggers. Her face burned, her throat tightened. For the first time in her life, she fled the church in tears. Back at the farmhouse, she collapsed at the kitchen table, her sobs shaking her frail body. Michael followed, his face flushed with rage. How could they do this to you? He demanded. How could they stand in God's house and spread lies? Margaret wiped her eyes with the edge of her shawl. Because they believe the lies themselves, and perhaps others do too. No, Michael said fiercely. Not everyone, and I won't let them take you down. That night, Margaret opened her journal and wrote with trembling hands. Today I felt humiliation deeper than ever before, not in the privacy of my home, but before neighbors, before friends. My children, my own flesh, cast me as a fool, a danger to myself. Yet I know the truth. I am not weak. I am not unfit. I will endure. For somewhere within this storm lies a truth they cannot bury. And when it comes to light, they will see me as I am not broken, but unbroken. She set down the pen, her tears soaking the page. Meanwhile, in town, James and Anna celebrated quietly at Deborah's dining table. "The judge is leaning our way," James said confidently. "Once guardianship is granted, the house is as good as sold. $500,000 split between us more if we push the land deal quickly." Anna lifted her glass. "To the future." But somewhere in her eyes lingered a shadow, the faintest flicker of guilt. Back at the farmhouse, the fire crackled as Margaret whispered into the silence. "They think the fight is nearly won, but they have not yet seen the strength of a mother who has nothing left to lose." And though she did not yet know how, she vowed she would rise again. The weeks that followed the first court hearing were some of the darkest Margaret Hayes had ever known. The farmhouse, once her refuge, began to feel like a prison of whispers and shadows. Every time she stepped outside, she felt the weight of eyes upon her neighbors staring too long, their smiles brittle, their whispers sharp. At the grocery store, Mrs. Doyle offered her a sympathetic pat on the hand, the kind reserved for those already defeated. At the post office, one man muttered, "Poor woman doesn't even realize she's slipping." Another replied, "Her kids are doing the right thing. Best to get her settled before something terrible happens." Margaret walked home with her head held high, but tears burned behind her eyes. Each word, each look, was another wound cut not by strangers, but by her own children's lies. Michael saw the toll it was taking. One night, as they sat by the fire, he spoke gently. "Mother, you can't keep carrying this alone. We need help, someone in town who'll speak for you, who'll tell the truth." Margaret shook her head. "They've already chosen their side. They believe James and Anna because wealth speaks louder than truth." "Not everyone," Michael insisted. "There are still those who respect you. Pastor Green, perhaps. Or Mrs. Thompson, she remembers how you cared for her when her husband passed. We need allies." Margaret sighed, her gaze fixed on the flames. "Allies won't change the hearts of my children." "No," Michael said firmly. "But they might help the court see who you really are." The next morning, Michael went into town alone. He visited Mrs. Thompson, the elderly widow who lived near the old mill. "Michael," she said kindly, ushering him in, "I heard what your brother and sister are saying about your mother. It isn't right." "Will you speak for her?" Michael asked. "In court, or even in town, just to remind people who she really is?" Mrs. Thompson hesitated, glancing at the floor. "I love your mother, truly. But James has power in this town. He has friends with money. I can't afford to make enemies." Michael's heart sank. At the church, Pastor Green listened quietly as Michael pleaded his case. The pastor nodded, but his words were careful. "The Lord asks us to honor our parents, Michael. But as a pastor, I cannot choose sides in a family's private matter." By the time Michael returned home, the sun had set, and his shoulders sagged with defeat. "They're afraid," he admitted to Margaret. "Afraid of James, afraid of conflict. No one will stand with us." Margaret reached for his hand. "Then we will stand alone." "It won't be the first time." The following week brought the second court hearing. Margaret sat quietly as James's attorney painted her as fragile, confused, incapable. He presented neighbors' testimonies. Mrs. Doyle claiming she'd forgotten her grocery money. Mr. Haskins insisting she'd stumbled dangerously near traffic. Lies, half-truths, twisted moments magnified into false evidence. When it was Michael's turn, his voice was filled with fire. "My mother is not weak. She remembers every sacrifice she made for us. She's lived alone for years without incident. The only danger she faces is from her own children, who care more about money than her dignity." But the judge's expression was unreadable. Margaret felt the walls of the courtroom closing in. That night, back at the farmhouse, Margaret collapsed into her chair by the fire. Her shawl slipped from her shoulders as tears spilled down her cheeks. "I feel so tired, Michael," she whispered. "So tired of fighting. Perhaps it would be easier if I gave them what they want." Michael's eyes widened. "Don't say that, Mother. That's what they're hoping for, to wear you down until you surrender." "But what am I fighting for?" she asked weakly. A house? Memories? The respect of a town that no longer sees me clearly? My own children have turned against me. What is left to hold on to? Michael knelt before her, taking her frail hands in his. You're fighting for yourself, for your dignity, for the truth of who you are. If you give in now, they win not just the house, but the right to say you were weak. And you are not weak, Mother. You never were. His words stirred something faint within her, a flicker of the strength she had long carried. But the weight of betrayal still pressed heavy on her chest. Days passed in silence. Margaret wandered the halls of the farmhouse at night, pausing before the portrait of Robert that hung above the fireplace. His eyes, frozen in paint, seemed to watch her with quiet strength. I don't know if I can do this, Robert, she whispered. I feel alone, abandoned, even by those I gave everything to. Tell me, did we fail them, or did they fail us? No answer came, only the creak of the old house settling in the cold. The storm inside her heart mirrored the storm outside. One night, as snow hammered against the windows, Margaret sat at the kitchen table, her journal open before her. I have reached the edge of myself. My children, once the joy of my life, now circle me like vultures. I hear their lies echoed in the voices of neighbors, repeated in the walls of the courtroom. Perhaps they are right. Perhaps I am unfit not because I cannot care for myself, but because I cannot seem to care for them as they are. How can a mother love children who wound her so deeply? And yet, I do. Against reason, against pain, I love them still. But love may not be enough to save me. Her tears fell onto the page, smearing the ink. She closed the journal and laid her head against the table, her sobs muffled by the silence of the farmhouse. In that moment, Margaret Hayes felt utterly alone. But deep within, though she could not yet see it, the seeds of strength remained. And when the time came, those seeds would grow into a force her children could never have anticipated. The snow began to melt in early March, revealing patches of muddy ground around the Hayes farmhouse. But with the change in season came no relief for Margaret. If anything, the pressure from James and Anna only grew heavier. One morning, a man in a suit appeared at her door. He introduced himself as a property assessor. I've been sent to appraise the value of this home and land, he said briskly. Margaret frowned. By whom? He glanced at his clipboard. Your children, James and Anna Hayes. They claim to have authority to move forward with the sale. Margaret's heart lurched. They do not have that authority, she said firmly. This is my home. No one will step foot inside without my permission. The man shifted uncomfortably. Ma'am, I'm just doing my job. You'll do it elsewhere, she replied, her voice like steel. She shut the door in his face, her hands trembling not with weakness, but with anger. It was the first time in weeks she had felt her old fire return. That evening, when Michael came home, she told him what happened. His face darkened with fury. They're moving ahead as if they've already won, he growled. They don't even care about the court's decision. Margaret's eyes narrowed. Then let them see I am not as fragile as they believe. The following Sunday, Margaret did something unexpected. She went to church, not quietly, not slipping into the back pew as she had in recent weeks, but walking proudly down the center aisle. Heads turned. Whispers began, but she held her chin high, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders like armor. During the fellowship hour, Anna cornered her again. Mother, why do you keep putting yourself through this? Everyone sees the truth. You're embarrassing yourself. But this time, Margaret did not shrink. She met Anna's eyes and said clearly, the only embarrassment here is the way a daughter speaks of her own mother. The room fell silent. For a moment, even Anna had no reply. Margaret walked away, leaving her daughter stunned. But James was not so easily rattled. That same week, he came to the farmhouse late one evening. The sky was dark, the field silent except for the cry of distant owls. He pushed his way inside without knocking, his anger sharp. You humiliated Anna in front of half the church, he said coldly. Margaret looked up from her chair by the fire. I spoke the truth. You're making a fool of yourself, James snapped. And if you continue, you'll force my hand. I'll have you declared incompetent before the month is out. Margaret's gaze did not waver. You've already tried. You've already lied. And yet here I am still standing, still unbroken. Do your worst, James. You cannot take from me what you did not give. For the first time, James hesitated. There was something in her voice, something steady and unyielding, that unsettled him. Without another word, he stormed out into the night. But Margaret's defiance did not come without cost. That night, alone in her bed, she felt the weight of exhaustion press against her bones. She had spoken bravely, but her body trembled with the effort. Lord, she prayed silently, if you have left any strength in me, let it hold a little longer. The days that followed brought more cruelty. James and Anna began visiting neighbors, spreading rumors that Margaret had become unstable. She talks to herself, James told Mr. Haskins. She forgets where she is, Anna whispered to Mrs. Doyle. She's dangerous, they insisted. Soon, Margaret noticed the shift. Fewer people greeted her in town. Some crossed the street to avoid her. Even old friends grew distant. At the post office, she overheard one woman murmur, "Poor thing doesn't even know what's happening." Margaret returned home, her heart heavy. Yet as she sat by the fire that evening, she remembered Robert's words long ago. When people turn against you, stand taller. Truth has its own voice, even if it takes time to be heard. She closed her eyes and whispered, I will stand taller. One evening, Michael found her writing in her journal, her hand steady despite her weariness. What are you writing, Mother? He asked. She looked up, her eyes shining. I'm writing the truth. Every word they twist, every lie they tell, I write what really happened. One day, this record will speak louder than their voices. Michael smiled faintly. That's good. That's smart. Margaret nodded. They want the world to believe I am weak, but I will leave behind proof that I was never broken. If I cannot stop them now, then the truth will still live after me. For the first time in months, Michael saw a spark in her eyes that reminded him of the mother who had raised him fierce, determined, unyielding. But James and Anna were not finished. At the next court session, their attorney presented a new claim, that Margaret had refused entry to a legal assessor, proving her paranoia and instability. She slammed the door in his face, the lawyer argued. She is not only unfit, but hostile. Margaret rose to speak. Her voice was calm, but each word rang with clarity. I refused entry because he came with false authority. This is my home. No court, no lawyer, no child may take from me what is mine to protect. If that is hostility, then I embrace it. Better a hostile mother than a broken one. Her words silenced the courtroom. Even the judge leaned back, studying her with new eyes. That night, as she and Michael returned home, Margaret sat by the fire and whispered, They thought me frail, but perhaps they have forgotten the strength of a woman who has weathered storms greater than this. Michael took her hand. They're starting to see it, Mother, and soon they'll see everything. The days lengthened as spring crept across Maplewood, but inside the Hayes farmhouse, the atmosphere remained heavy. Margaret Hayes, though still weary, carried herself differently now. She no longer walked with the bent shoulders of defeat. Each step was deliberate, as though she had remembered some secret strength hidden deep within her bones. James and Anna noticed, and it unsettled them. One afternoon, Margaret sat at the kitchen table, slicing bread, when Anna burst in without knocking. You embarrassed us in court, Anna snapped. People are starting to think you're stronger than you are. But we know better. Margaret calmly set down the knife. Do you? Anna hesitated. For the first time, her confidence faltered under her mother's gaze. You can't keep this up forever. You're old. Time is against you. Sooner or later, you'll break. Margaret's lips curved into a faint, tired smile. I've broken many times in my life, Anna. but I've always pieced myself back together. That's what you don't understand. Strength isn't about never breaking. It's about rising again. Anna's face flushed with anger. We'll see how strong you are when the court rules against you. She stormed out, slamming the door behind her. Margaret exhaled slowly, whispering to herself, "Yes, we shall see." That evening, Michael returned from town carrying a brown envelope. He set it on the table, his eyes filled with both worry and excitement. "I've been digging," he said. "James isn't as clean as he pretends. His real estate firm, he's been in debt for years. He needs money, fast. That's why he's pushing so hard to sell the farmhouse." Margaret's eyes sharpened. "Debt?" Michael nodded. "If the court grants guardianship, he'll sell the house within weeks, and every penny will go into paying off what he owes. Anna thinks she'll get her share, but she won't. He's bleeding her dry, too." Margaret leaned back, her mind racing. For the first time, she glimpsed the true scale of James's desperation. "They think me blind," she murmured, "but it is they who cannot see what lies ahead." Over the next few weeks, Margaret began writing more diligently in her journal. Each evening by the fire, she documented not only her pain, but also the history of the farmhouse, the sacrifices Robert made, the debts she repaid, the nights she went hungry so her children could eat. She wrote of James's greed, Anna's bitterness, and Michael's loyalty. One night, Michael asked, "Why write it all down, Mother?" "Because the truth must live somewhere," Margaret replied. "If they silence me in court, these pages will speak, and one day they will be forced to listen." Michael studied her, realizing she was no longer simply defending herself, she was preparing something larger. James, meanwhile, grew more ruthless. He began visiting the farmhouse unannounced, sometimes bringing strangers with him. "This is the property I mentioned," he told one man, gesturing toward the fields. "Prime land, worth every penny once we secure the rights." Margaret stood in the doorway, her arms folded. "You have no rights here. Show them the land again, and I'll call the sheriff." The man shifted uneasily, muttering, "I don't want trouble." James forced a smile, but his eyes burned with fury. "You're wasting everyone's time, Mother. Don't think you can hold out forever." "Bye." Margaret's voice was calm, steady. "I can hold out as long as it takes." But James wasn't the only one scheming. Anna began visiting neighbors more often, weaving stories of Margaret's forgetfulness and confusion. "She wandered into the street last week," Anna told Mrs. Doyle. "She left the kettle boiling for hours," she whispered to Mr. Haskins. The lies spread, and soon Margaret felt their sting whenever she stepped into town. People avoided her eyes, their pitying smiles sharper than knives. One afternoon, as she collected her mail, a woman muttered under her breath, "Poor old soul. Doesn't even realize she's losing everything." Margaret returned home, her head high. Yet when she reached her kitchen, she allowed the tears to fall. "Robert," she whispered to the portrait above the fireplace, "I don't know how much more I can bear, but I will not fall before them. Not yet." That night, Michael confronted his siblings in town. "Stop slandering her," he demanded. "She's not helpless. She's not what you're saying she is." James sneered. "You're blinded by sentiment, Michael. You've always been weak. You think clinging to Mother makes you noble? It makes you pathetic." Anna added, "When the court rules, you'll have nothing. No house, no say, no future. You'll see how wrong you are." Michael's fists clenched, but he forced himself to stay calm. "We'll see, won't we?" Back at the farmhouse, Margaret sat waiting. When Michael told her what happened, she smiled faintly. "They mistake your calm for weakness, Michael. But calm is power. We will not shout louder than them. We will simply endure until the truth reveals itself." Michael frowned. "But what if the court doesn't see the truth?" Margaret placed her hand on his. "Then we will show them. In time." The next court session arrived. James's attorney presented more evidence, sworn statements from neighbors, exaggerated incidents of Margaret's supposed confusion. But when it was Margaret's turn, she stood slowly, her shawl draped around her like armor. Her voice, though soft, carried through the room. I have been called forgetful, unstable, even dangerous. But I remember every sacrifice I made for these children. I remember every night I worked until my hands bled to keep a roof over their heads. And I remember this. The home I live in was built not of wood and stone, but of love and sacrifice. That is what they seek to sell. That is what they wish to destroy. But as long as I live, I will not allow it. For the first time, murmurs in the courtroom turned in her favor. The judge leaned forward, studying her carefully. James's confident smirk faltered. That night, Margaret wrote in her journal, "Today, I saw it. The first crack in their armor. They thought me broken, but they forget that I have endured storms greater than greed. The truth is not yet revealed, but it waits, and when it comes, it will break them." She closed the book, her hands steady, her eyes filled not with despair, but with quiet resolve. The spring rains came hard that April, flooding the fields around the Hayes farmhouse and turning the dirt roads into rivers of mud. Yet inside Margaret's home, the fire still burned, a stubborn symbol of her endurance. James, however, was growing restless. His debts pressed heavier with each passing week. Creditors called his office daily. Investors demanded returns he could not provide. And all he could think about was the farmhouse, its land, its value slipping further out of reach as his mother refused to bend. One evening, he arrived at the farmhouse unannounced. His car splashed mud across the porch steps as he stormed inside. "You're ruining everything," he spat. "Do you understand that? The house, the land, it could solve everything. But you cling to it, like it's some kind of throne." Margaret looked up from her knitting, her voice calm. "It is not a throne, James. It is a home built by your father and me with sacrifice you will never understand." James slammed his fist against the table. "I don't care about your sacrifices. I care about what's left. And if you don't sign those papers, I'll see you dragged through court until there's nothing left of you but shame." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "You already tried shame. It didn't break me. You'll have to find another weapon." James's face flushed with rage. For the first time, he had no words. He stormed out, the slam of the door echoing through the night. The next morning, Anna arrived alone. She carried a pie, her face pale, her hands unsteady. "Mother," she said softly, setting the pie on the table, "I wanted to make peace." Margaret studied her daughter's face. "Peace? Or pity?" Anna flinched. I don't want things to be ugly between us." Margaret's gaze was steady. "Then why do you repeat your brother's lies? Why do you spread stories that wound me deeper than any stranger's words could?" Tears welled in Anna's eyes. "Because James said it was for the best. He said you couldn't handle the truth, that you weren't safe on your own. And I wanted to believe him." Margaret's voice softened. "And what do you believe now?" Anna's lips trembled. "I don't know. Sometimes I see you strong, clear, sharper than anyone in this town. And other times, I hear his voice in my ear, and I doubt myself." Margaret reached across the table, placing her frail hand over Anna's. "Doubt your brother if you must. Doubt the world. But do not doubt me. I am not lost, Anna. Not yet." Anna pulled away, her tears falling freely. "I don't know what to believe anymore." She hurried out before Margaret could say more. That night, Margaret confided in Michael. "She came to me," Margaret whispered. "Anna, for a moment, I saw the girl she once was. I think part of her heart is still mine." Michael frowned. "She's weak, Mother." "Easily swayed. Don't trust her." Margaret shook her head. "Weakness is not the same as malice. James is consumed by greed. But Anna is consumed by fear. Fear can be undone. Greed cannot. Michael considered her words, but remained wary. In town, James began to unravel. At the tavern one evening, after too many drinks, he slammed his glass on the bar. "My mother's a fool," he raged. "She sits on a gold mine, and she won't let it go. She'd rather rot in that house than do something useful with it." Several men exchanged uneasy glances. Even those who had once sided with James now saw his desperation bleeding through. "You ought to be careful, Hayes," one man muttered. "People are starting to wonder if this is about her safety or your pockets." James sneered, but inside, panic churned. He was losing control of the story. Meanwhile, Margaret kept writing. Each night, her journal grew thicker pages filled with her memories, her sacrifices, her truths. She recorded the cruelty of her children, the lies told in court, the whispers of the town. "Why write so much, Mother?" Michael asked one evening. Margaret looked at him, her eyes burning with quiet determination. "Because when the time comes, this book will be my voice, and it will speak louder than their lies." Michael realized then that she was no longer merely defending herself. She was preparing a reckoning. The next court session arrived. James, looking more ragged than before, pushed forward with new claims. He presented forged receipts, suggesting Margaret had forgotten to pay bills. He even produced a neighbor's testimony, Mr. Haskins, claiming she had wandered into his yard late at night. Confused, Margaret rose to respond. Her voice was calm, unshaken. "I am not confused," she said. "I am not weak. I am not lost. The only confusion here is the confusion of children who mistake greed for love." Her words sent murmurs through the courtroom. Even the judge leaned back, studying her with new interest. Afterward, as she and Michael walked home, Margaret whispered, "The tide is turning. Slowly, but it is turning." Michael nodded, though his brow furrowed. "But James won't stop. He's too desperate." Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. "Let him grow desperate. Desperation reveals truth faster than time ever could." That evening, Anna appeared again. This time, she lingered on the porch, her eyes red from crying. "Mother," she whispered, "I don't know if I can keep doing this. James, he scares me, he pushes me, tells me what to say. But when I see you, I feel sick inside. I don't want to be part of this anymore." Margaret opened the door, her expression softening. "Then don't be. You are not chained to his choices." Anna shook her head. "It isn't that simple. He has leverage. Things about me I don't want others to know." Margaret's voice was steady. "Secrets cannot control you forever, Anna. When the truth is spoken, it loses its power." Anna stared at her mother, torn between fear and longing. Then she turned and disappeared into the night. Margaret watched her go, her heart heavy but hopeful. "She's wavering," she whispered to the fire. "And where there is doubt, there is still a chance for redemption." The town of Maplewood seemed to lean into gossip that spring. In the bakery, at the diner, outside the post office, whispers floated like pollen in the air. Everywhere Margaret Hayes went, she felt their eyes. Some pitied her, some judged her, but none spoke openly in her defense. James fed those whispers with venom. He visited neighbors late into the evening, speaking in low, persuasive tones. "She's slipping," he said with practiced sorrow. "I love my mother, but I can't ignore the danger anymore. What if she leaves the stove on? What if she wanders into the road at night? Better we take care of her than bury her." Most nodded, uneasy but convinced. After all, James carried the weight of authority, a polished suit, a confident voice, the air of someone who belonged in control. But beneath that polished surface, desperation gnawed at him. His debts had doubled. His firm was hanging by a thread. Every day without that farmhouse pushed him closer to ruin. Anna, however, began to falter. At the grocery store, she avoided Margaret's eyes. At church, she barely spoke. The certainty that once laced her voice when she echoed James's claims was gone, replaced with hesitation, even guilt. One evening, Anna appeared at the farmhouse again, clutching a shawl tight against the spring chill. "Mother," she said softly, standing at the door. "James doesn't know I'm here." Margaret studied her daughter carefully. "Then why are you?" Anna's lips trembled. "Because I can't sleep. I keep hearing your voice in court, and I keep seeing your face when you told me not to doubt you, and her words broke into a sob. "I don't know if I can keep lying." Margaret's voice was gentle but firm. "Then stop. Truth is always harder at first, but it frees you in the end." Anna shook her head. "James won't forgive me if I turn against him. He'll ruin me. He knows things I can't let people find out." Margaret's eyes softened. "Secrets lose power the moment they're spoken. James holds you with fear, not love, but fear cannot last forever." Anna wiped her tears, whispering, "I don't know if I'm strong enough." Margaret reached out, brushing her daughter's cheek with a trembling hand. "Then borrow my strength until you find your own." While Anna's resolve wavered, James pressed harder. One night, Michael caught sight of two men surveying the property near the barn. He stormed out into the yard. "What are you doing here?" he barked. The men exchanged uneasy looks. "Mr. Hayes sent us. Said we could take measurements." "You mean James," Michael growled. "Well, I say you leave. Now, before I call the sheriff." The men muttered apologies and hurried off. But the message was clear. James was moving forward as if the farmhouse was already his. When Michael told Margaret, her jaw tightened. "He is trying to wear us down. But he forgets I have endured worse storms than this." At the next court session, James arrived, looking worn but determined. His attorney presented a new line of attack. "Your Honor," the lawyer declared, "this is not about greed. It is about safety. Mrs. Hayes refuses assistance. She denies her children entry. She has even threatened legal assessors sent to evaluate her home. This is not the behavior of a sound mind." The judge turned to Margaret. "Mrs. Hayes, do you wish to respond?" Margaret rose slowly, leaning on her cane. Her voice was calm but resonant. "I refused entry because my children claimed authority they do not possess. This is my home, the home my husband and I built with sweat and sacrifice. If I am guilty of anything, it is of protecting what we created. My children call it paranoia. I call it love." Her words filled the room with silence. For the first time, the judge's expression softened. That evening, after they returned home, Margaret sat by the fire with her journal. "Mother," Michael said quietly, "the judge is beginning to see through them. I could feel it." Margaret nodded. "Yes, but James is not finished. His desperation will drive him to darker places, and when it does, the truth will have to be ready." Michael frowned. "What truth?" Margaret closed her journal, her fingers resting gently on the worn cover. "In time, you'll see." Meanwhile, James's mask began to slip in public. At the tavern, his voice rose in drunken rage. "She'll regret this," he muttered to anyone who'd listen. "That old woman thinks she can beat me? I'll strip that house down to its bones before I let her win." The bartender shook his head. "Careful, James. People are starting to talk. It doesn't look good fighting your own mother." James slammed his glass down. "She stopped being a mother the day she defied me." But those words, overheard by two men at the bar, spread through town by morning. Back at the farmhouse, Margaret remained steady. She cooked her meals, tended her small garden, and wrote in her journal each night. Yet Michael noticed something new, an air of quiet planning. One evening he asked, "Mother, what are you keeping from me?" Margaret smiled faintly. "Not keeping, my son. Preparing." "Preparing for what?" "For the day when truth and lies finally collide." Michael studied her, realizing she was no longer the weary, beaten woman from weeks ago. Something had changed. She was waiting for the right moment. Anna's visits grew more frequent. Sometimes she came in tears, sometimes in silence, sitting at the kitchen table as though searching for courage. Margaret never pressed her, only offered tea and listened. One night, Anna whispered, "James says he'll cut me off if I betray him. No money, no support. He says I'll have nothing." Margaret's answer was simple. "Then you will have me." Anna wept, her shoulders shaking. Margaret wrapped her in frail arms, holding her like the child she once rocked to sleep. "Mother," Anna sobbed, "I don't deserve your love." "Love is not deserved, Anna," Margaret whispered. "It is given." As the storm clouds gathered, Margaret's resolve only deepened. In her journal she wrote, "The time is near. James grows desperate. Anna grows uncertain. Michael grows weary. But I grow stronger. They think my silence is weakness, but it is patience. They think my frailty is defeat, but it is endurance. Soon, they will know the truth I have carried all these years. And when it is revealed, it will not only save me, it will show them who they truly are." She closed the book, her eyes burning in the glow of the firelight. The storm was coming, and Margaret Hayes was ready. By late May, the fields around the Hayes farmhouse were bright with wildflowers, but inside, the air was thick with tension. James's desperation had reached a fever pitch. His creditors were circling like vultures, and whispers about his failing business were spreading through Maplewood. Each day that passed without control of the farmhouse pushed him further toward collapse. He began making threats openly now. When Michael encountered him outside the courthouse, James's words were venomous. "You think you're noble siding with her?" James sneered. "You're throwing your life away for a woman who's one step from the grave. When she's gone, what will you have? Nothing. While I'll have everything." Michael clenched his fists. "If everything means betraying the woman who raised us, then I'd rather have nothing." James's face darkened, but he said nothing more. He simply turned and walked away, his silence more menacing than any words. That week, Margaret received an unexpected letter. It was from the court, informing her that James had filed an emergency petition to accelerate the guardianship ruling. Michael read it aloud, his voice shaking with anger. "He's trying to force the judge's hand. He wants the decision made before anyone has time to see the truth." Margaret's expression hardened. "Then we must be ready sooner than I thought." Michael frowned. "Ready for what?" Margaret met his eyes, her voice quiet but steady. "For the truth to finally come into the light." Meanwhile, Anna's torment deepened. She visited the farmhouse more often, sometimes sitting for hours without speaking. Margaret offered her tea, silence, or gentle words, never pressing too hard. One afternoon, Anna finally broke. "Mother," she whispered, her voice raw, "I can't do this anymore. James is suffocating me. He calls me weak, says I'm nothing without him. And yet, when I'm here, with you, I feel something I haven't felt in years." Margaret reached across the table, her hand trembling but firm. "You feel peace. Because truth brings peace, even when it hurts." Anna shook her head. "If I betray him, he'll destroy me. He knows about debts I hid, things that would ruin me in this town." Margaret's eyes softened. "Secrets lose their power the moment they are spoken. You fear shame, but shame cannot kill you. Only lies can." Anna wept, her head in her hands. Margaret held her gently, whispering, "You are not lost, Anna. Not yet." That night, James arrived at Anna's house, drunk and furious. "You've been seeing her, haven't you?" he shouted. "Sneaking to her side like some guilty child." Anna's hands shook. "She's our mother, James. She deserves." "She deserves nothing," he roared. "She should have signed it all over years ago. Do you think she cares about us? She's selfish. She clings to that house because it's all she has left. And if you keep siding with her, I'll cut you off. You'll be nothing!" Anna's tears spilled, but something inside her shifted. For the first time, she didn't cower. She met his eyes and said softly, "Better nothing with the truth than everything with lies." James froze, stunned. For a moment, he saw not the timid sister he had controlled for years, but a woman ready to break free. His face twisted with rage. "You'll regret that," he hissed before storming out. The emergency hearing was scheduled within days. Margaret sat quietly at the kitchen table as Michael prepared stacks of documents, determined to defend her. "Mother, we don't have enough," he muttered. "His lawyer has neighbors, forged papers, everything lined up. We need more proof." Margaret placed her hand on his. "Do not fear. The proof is already written." She tapped her journal, its pages thick with ink. Michael frowned. "But will the court listen?" Margaret's eyes gleamed with quiet fire. "They will, because truth once spoken cannot be unheard." On the morning of the hearing, Margaret dressed with care. She wore her best navy dress, the one Robert had once admired. She pinned her silver hair neatly, wrapped her shawl tightly, and tucked her journal into her bag. As Michael helped her into the courthouse, whispers rippled through the crowd. Some pitied her, others judged her, but all watched. Inside, James sat with his lawyer, his expression smug but strained. Anna sat behind him, her face pale, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. The judge entered, and the room fell silent. James's lawyer spoke first, painting Margaret once again as frail, confused, unstable. "This guardianship is not about greed," he insisted. "It is about safety. Mrs. Hayes is vulnerable, and my clients only wish to protect her." The judge turned to Margaret. "Mrs. Hayes, do you wish to respond?" Margaret rose slowly, her cane steady in her hand. She pulled her journal from her bag and placed it on the table before her. "Yes, Your Honor," she said, her voice firm. "I have something to say, something I should have said long ago." The courtroom leaned in, the air electric. Even James shifted uneasily, sensing something he could not control. Margaret opened the journal, her fingers brushing over the pages. "This book holds the truth," she began. "The truth of my life, my sacrifices, my children. For years, I have endured lies, insults, betrayal. They tell you I am weak, that I am lost. But here, in my own words, is the proof that I am not, I am strong. I am clear, I am unbroken." She lifted her eyes to the judge. "I will not be silenced by greed, not by fear, not even by my own children." The room fell into stunned silence. James's face drained of color. Anna's eyes filled with tears. The judge leaned forward. "Continue, Mrs. Hayes." Margaret's voice did not tremble. "I have carried a secret one that explains why this house matters so deeply. And today I will reveal it, not just for myself, but for the truth that has been buried for too long." Her words hung in the air like a thunderclap, the promise of a storm that would soon break. That night, back at the farmhouse, Margaret sat by the fire with Michael. "Mother," he said softly, "what is the secret?" Margaret looked at him, her eyes glistening with both sorrow and strength. "You will know soon enough, my son," she whispered. "When the time is right, the truth will shatter every lie." Michael nodded, though unease stirred in his chest. Whatever secret she carried, it was powerful, powerful enough to change everything. In her journal that night, Margaret wrote, "The hour is near. James thinks he holds the power. Anna trembles between love and fear. Michael waits for truth he cannot yet see. But I have carried this burden long enough. Soon, the weight will be lifted, and when it is, the storm will break, and none of us will be the same." She closed the book, her hands steady. The fire crackled beside her, its glow reflecting in her determined eyes. The stage was set. The climax was coming. The courthouse was packed the following week. Word had spread through Maplewood that Margaret Hayes, the frail widow caught in a bitter battle with her children, had promised to reveal a secret that would shatter every lie. Even those with no stake in the case filled the benches, eager to witness what had become the town's most scandalous drama. James walked in with his lawyer, wearing his best suit, his jaw tight. He could feel the eyes on him, the whispers, the greedy son, the one trying to steal his mother's home. He ignored them, but the shame burned beneath his skin. Anna followed a few steps behind, her face pale, her eyes downcast. She looked like a woman torn in two. Margaret entered last, leaning on her cane, Michael steady at her side. Though her body was frail, her eyes burned with a light no one had seen in months. She carried her journal pressed against her chest like a shield. When the judge called the session to order, the air grew still. "Mrs. Hayes," the judge said, "last session you claimed you had a revelation. You may proceed." Margaret stood, her shawl falling back from her shoulders. She opened her journal, the pages worn with ink and age. "For months I have endured lies spoken against me," she began, her voice strong and clear. "I have been called confused, unstable, unfit. My children, my own blood have painted me as a burden. But today I will speak a truth that none of them expect." The courtroom leaned forward, breathless. Margaret looked directly at James. "You want this farmhouse, don't you? You think it is your right. But what you do not know, what I have never told you, is this. The farmhouse is not what you think it is." James's smirk faltered. Margaret turned to the judge. "Years ago, when my husband Robert passed, I discovered papers hidden in his desk. Papers he never spoke of while he lived. They revealed that the land this farmhouse stands on was not inherited by him, but entrusted to me." The room erupted in murmurs. The judge banged his gavel for silence. "Entrusted?" he asked. Margaret nodded. "Yes, entrusted. My husband knew that our children, though he loved them, might grow to value wealth more than family. He saw it in James even as a boy. So, he left the deed not in both our names, but solely in mine, and with it, a letter. A letter in which he begged me never to give up this home, no matter the pressure, until I was ready to pass it on myself." She lifted a folded piece of yellowed paper from her journal. This letter, his words, his wish. James leapt to his feet. "Lies!" he barked. "Forgery! You expect us to believe you've sat on this for decades without saying a word?" Margaret's gaze did not waver. "I stayed silent because I hoped it would never come to this. I prayed my children would honor the love that built this house instead of coveting its worth. But you, James, you forced my hand." The judge took the letter, examining the faded ink, the careful handwriting. He compared it to old documents already in the court's records, Robert Hayes's signature, familiar and firm. "It matches," he murmured. James's face drained of color. Margaret turned her eyes to Anna. Her voice softened. "And you, my daughter, you followed your brother, believing he spoke for love. But I tell you now he spoke only for greed. This letter proves the truth. The house was never his to take, nor yours. It was mine, entrusted by your father, and it will remain mine until I choose otherwise." Anna's lip trembled. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she whispered, "Mother, I didn't know. I swear, I didn't know." Margaret's gaze held her daughter's. "I believe you, but you chose to believe lies instead of me. That is your burden to carry." Anna broke into sobs, burying her face in her hands. The courtroom buzzed with murmurs of shock. James's lawyer tried to object, but the judge silenced him with a raised hand. "This letter changes everything," the judge declared. "It affirms Mrs. Hayes's ownership of the property. Unless credible evidence is presented to disprove it, her competency is no longer in question. In fact, this court must consider whether her children have acted with malicious intent." James's fists clenched. "This is a trick! She's manipulating everyone! That house!" "Enough!" the judge snapped. "Sit down, Mr. Hayes, or I'll have you removed." James sank into his chair, his face twisted with fury. Margaret closed her journal. Her voice was steady. "For months, I have been painted as weak. But weakness did not raise 3 children alone after a husband's death. Weakness did not keep food on the table when there was no money. Weakness did not endure betrayal after betrayal. What you see before you is not weakness, it is strength, the strength of a mother who has carried more than her share and refuses to be broken now. Her words filled the room with silence, then with a wave of murmurs not against her, but in awe of her. That night, back at the farmhouse, Margaret sat by the fire with Michael. "You did it," he said softly, pride in his voice. "You silenced them. You proved everything." Margaret shook her head. "No, Michael. This is only the beginning. James will not surrender so easily. His greed runs deeper than you know. But now he knows that I am not afraid. And that changes everything." Michael took her hand. "Whatever comes, we'll face it together." Margaret smiled faintly, her eyes reflecting the firelight. "Yes, together, always." In her journal that night, she wrote, "The secret is spoken, the burden shared. James is shaken, Anna is broken, Michael is steady. The storm has broken, but the battle is not yet done. Tomorrow, the fight continues. But tonight, for the first time in months, I feel the weight lift from my shoulders. Robert, I kept my promise." She closed the book, her hand steady. The fire flickered. Outside, the wind howled. Inside, Margaret Hayes waited, knowing the fiercest clash was still to come. James Hayes had never known humiliation like the one he felt leaving the courthouse that day. The whispers followed him down the steps like gnats. The greedy son. She outsmarted him. Imagine trying to steal from your own mother. He yanked his tie loose, his jaw locked. Every step felt heavier, every whisper sharper. He had built his life on control, on the image of success, but now the entire town saw him as a failure, a man undone by his own mother. That night, he drank himself into a rage. The whiskey burned, but not enough to drown the fury boiling inside him. By the time the bottle was empty, his thoughts had turned dark, reckless. "She thinks she's won," he muttered to the empty room. "But she hasn't seen the last of me. No one humiliates James Hayes. No one." Meanwhile, at the farmhouse, Margaret sat quietly by the fire. Though she had revealed Robert's letter and shaken James's case, she knew her son too well. "He won't stop," she whispered to Michael, who sat across from her. "Men like James never stop until everything is ashes." Michael nodded grimly. "Then we'll be ready." But Margaret's eyes carried both strength and sorrow. "I pray readiness will be enough." 2 nights later, James showed up at the farmhouse unannounced. His eyes were bloodshot, his breath sour with liquor. He banged on the door until Michael flung it open. "What do you want?" Michael demanded. James shoved past him. "I want what's mine." Margaret sat at the kitchen table, her knitting needles still in her lap. "This house is not yours, James. It never was." James's laughter was bitter, wild. "That letter? That paper you pulled out like some miracle? You think it changes anything? It's just words, Mother. Words can be burned. Houses can be sold. Families can be destroyed." Michael stepped between them. "Leave now, James, before you say something you regret." James's eyes gleamed with venom. "Regret? The only regret I have is ever letting her think she had control." He pointed a trembling finger at Margaret. "You're nothing without this house, and I'll take it, even if it kills you." Silence fell heavy. Margaret's voice was soft, steady. "Is that what you want, James? To kill me? To destroy your mother for the sake of money?" For a flicker of a moment, James's bravado cracked, but pride snapped it back into place. "Don't tempt me," he spat, before storming out into the night. Michael locked the door behind him, his shoulders tense. "He's losing control, Mother. I don't know what he's capable of anymore." Margaret's knitting lay untouched in her lap. "Neither do I," she admitted. "But the truth always brings darkness into the light before it heals. We must endure it." Anna appeared at the farmhouse the next day, her eyes swollen from crying. "He's getting worse," she confessed. Last night, he smashed glasses, screamed at me for hours. He said he'd rather see you dead than let you keep the house. Michael's fists clenched. I knew it, Anna sobbed. I didn't believe him at first, but now I'm scared, Mother. He's not himself anymore. Margaret took her daughter's trembling hands. No, Anna, he is himself, revealed at last. Greed strips a man bare. What you see now is the truth of your brother. Anna's tears flowed. What have we done? I sided with him. I repeated his lies. And now he's unraveling. And it's my fault. Margaret's voice softened. You are guilty of weakness, Anna. But weakness can be redeemed. Greed cannot. The choice you make now will decide which one rules you. Anna wept harder, burying her face against Margaret's shoulder. For the first time in years, Margaret held her daughter like the child she once loved without question. That evening, Michael found James lurking near the property line. You've lost, James, Michael called out. Go home before you ruin yourself even further. James's laughter was hollow. Lost? I haven't even started. You think one letter will save her? You think this town cares about words on paper? No, brother. They care about power. And I'll take it back, even if I have to burn this whole place down. Michael stepped forward, fists clenched. If you ever set foot in this house again, you'll have to go through me. James sneered. Then so be it. He turned and vanished into the night. Inside, Margaret waited by the fire, her journal open. She wrote carefully, her hands steady. James rages louder each day. Anna trembles. Michael defends. But the storm is almost here. I feel it. The fire in his eyes is not just greed now, it is desperation, and desperation is the most dangerous weapon of all. I must be ready. We must all be ready. Tomorrow may break us, or redeem us. Tomorrow may break us. She closed the book, her gaze lingering on the flames. The next morning, news spread through Maplewood that James had been seen arguing violently with his creditors in town. Some claimed they heard threats. Others swore he'd promised he had one last card to play. By afternoon, he arrived at the farmhouse again, this time sober but cold, his expression a mask of controlled fury. Mother, he said, standing in the doorway, I'll give you one last chance. Sign the house over to me, and I'll walk away. Refuse, and I promise you'll regret it. Margaret looked at him calmly. I do not regret standing for what is right, and I will not sign. James's eyes narrowed to slits. For a heartbeat, he seemed ready to strike. Michael moved closer, ready to defend. Anna, who had come to stay for safety, trembled near the hearth. The silence stretched, heavy and suffocating, until James finally hissed, Then may God have mercy on you. He turned sharply and stormed out, leaving the farmhouse shaking with tension. That night, Margaret sat with Michael and Anna. The fire crackled, but no one spoke for a long time. Finally, Margaret whispered, It is near. The storm, the breaking point. We cannot run from it. All we can do is stand firm when it comes. Anna shivered. But what if he destroys everything? Margaret's gaze was steady, her voice calm. Then we will rebuild. But I will not bend to his greed. Not now. Not ever. Your father entrusted this house to me, and I will carry it until my last breath. Michael reached for her hand. And I'll stand with you. Anna hesitated, then placed her trembling hand atop theirs. Me too. I should have stood with you from the beginning, but I won't falter again. Margaret's eyes glistened with both pain and pride. Then whatever comes, we face it together. Outside, the wind howled across the fields, rattling the shutters. Inside, 3 hearts braced themselves. The storm was almost here, and when it broke, nothing would ever be the same. The night after James's last visit was restless. Margaret barely slept. Every creak of the farmhouse sounded like a threat. The wind moaned across the fields, rattling loose shutters and whispering of storms yet to come. She rose before dawn, lit a lantern, and sat at the kitchen table with her journal. Her hand trembled as she wrote, but her resolve did not. If tonight was the calm before the storm, then today will bring its breaking. I feel it in my bones. James will not let go. His pride will not allow it. And so, I must be ready not only to endure, but to stand. By mid-morning, rumors swirled through Maplewood. James had been seen arguing loudly outside the bank. Someone claimed he'd shouted that if his mother wouldn't give him the house, he'd take it by force. When Michael heard the whispers, his jaw clenched. "It's only a matter of time, Mother. He's unraveling." Margaret looked at him calmly. "Then let him unravel. In the end, truth will remain." That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, James arrived at the farmhouse once more. But this time, he wasn't alone. Two men stepped out of his car with him, rough-looking strangers from out of town. Michael met them at the porch, fists balled. "What is this?" James smirked. "Insurance. Since you and Mother won't listen to reason, I brought men who can help persuade you." Margaret's voice carried from inside. "This is my home, James. No one enters unless I invite them." James sneered. "Then consider this an invitation from your future guardian." He motioned to the men to move forward. Michael blocked the door. "Take one more step, and I swear you'll regret it." The standoff was tense. Anna stood just inside the doorway, trembling but defiant. Margaret remained seated at the kitchen table, her hands folded, her journal before her like a shield. Finally, one of the men muttered, "This ain't worth it, Hayes. We don't break into houses for family squabbles." James cursed under his breath, shoving them back toward the car. "Fine. Cowards. I don't need you." The men drove off, leaving James fuming. Inside, Margaret called out, "Come in, James. No games, no strangers, just you and me." James stalked into the kitchen, his face twisted with rage. "You think you've won because of that letter? Because the judge pitied you? Number. You've humiliated me, Mother. In front of the whole town. Do you understand what that means? Do you understand what you've done?" Margaret looked up calmly. "I defended the truth. If truth humiliates you, that is not my fault." James slammed his fists on the table, rattling the journal. "Truth? You wouldn't know truth if it hit you in the face. All you care about is control. You always favored Michael. You always doubted me. And now you cling to this house just to spite me." Margaret's voice was steady, almost gentle. "No, James. I cling to it because your father entrusted it to me, and because love is not measured in money or property. It is measured in sacrifice, something you've never understood." James's face flushed with fury. He grabbed the journal. "Sacrifice? Let's see how strong you are without your precious words." "Don't!" Michael shouted, lunging forward. But James was quicker. He hurled the journal into the fire. Anna gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. "No." The flames caught instantly, licking at the fragile pages. For the first time, Margaret's composure cracked. "James, stop!" she cried, struggling to rise. Michael dove toward the hearth, pulling the journal out before it was fully consumed. The edges were blackened, some pages lost, but most remained intact. He smothered the flames with a cloth, his chest heaving. Margaret clutched the damaged book to her chest, tears shining in her eyes. "You would burn the truth itself, James, just to hide your lies." James's voice broke, raw with desperation. "Because if I lose this, I lose everything!" Silence fell heavy. Even Anna stared at him with wide eyes. Margaret's voice was soft but cutting. "And now you see it, James. You have already lost. Not because of me, not because of the court, but because greed has eaten you alive. You have nothing left." James trembled, his chest heaving. For a moment he looked like a boy again, scared, cornered, broken. Then his mask returned, twisted with rage. "This isn't over," he hissed. "I'll find another way. I always do." He stormed out, the slam of the door echoing like thunder through the farmhouse. The three of them sat in silence for a long time. Anna wept softly, while Michael stared at the door, fists still clenched. Margaret held the charred journal in her lap, her hands trembling over its damaged pages. "Finally," she whispered. "It's coming. The end of this war. He has nothing left to lose, and that makes him dangerous. But we must endure one more storm, and then the truth will prevail." That night, Margaret wrote carefully in the surviving pages of her journal. Tonight, James revealed his soul. Not with words, but with fire. He would rather destroy the truth than face it. But even fire cannot erase what has already been spoken, what has already been seen. Tomorrow, the reckoning will come. I feel it in my bones. The storm is at its height. Soon, the sky will break, and with it, us all. She closed the book, the smell of smoke still clinging to its edges. The fire flickered low, casting shadows across her determined face. The farmhouse groaned under the night wind, as though the walls themselves braced for what was to come. The following day dawned gray and heavy, the kind of sky that seemed to warn of storms yet to break. Margaret rose early, the charred journal resting on her bedside table. She touched it gently, as if steadying herself. "This house has stood against blizzards, drought, and time itself," she whispered. "It will stand against James too." Downstairs, Michael was already pacing. Anna sat at the kitchen table, pale and sleepless, twisting her hands together. "He's not finished," Michael said, his voice taut. "I could see it in his eyes last night. He'll come back, and next time he won't stop at threats." Margaret nodded calmly. "Then let him come. The truth will outlive his fury." Anna looked up, tears in her eyes. "What if he really hurts you, Mother? What if he burns this house to the ground?" Margaret reached across the table, taking her daughter's trembling hands. "Then let him. A house is wood and stone. What matters is the love it sheltered. That he can never destroy." By late afternoon, the storm broke not in the sky, but at their door. James's car tore up the gravel drive, dust billowing in its wake. He slammed the door and strode toward the farmhouse, his eyes wild, his face gaunt with rage and desperation. Michael met him on the porch, blocking the way. "You're not welcome here, James." James sneered. "Out of my way. This ends tonight." Inside, Margaret sat waiting at the table, her shawl draped neatly around her shoulders, the damaged journal before her. Anna hovered nervously near the fireplace, her body trembling. James shoved past Michael and burst into the kitchen. His voice cracked like thunder. "Sign it over, Mother, right now. This is your last chance." Margaret looked up, her eyes calm. "I will never sign away the home your father entrusted to me." James's hand twitched, his jaw clenched. "Then maybe you won't live to keep it." The words froze the room. Anna gasped. Michael lunged forward. "Don't you dare," Michael roared. "Threaten her again and I swear." James shoved him back, his face contorted with fury. "You think you can stop me? You've always been the golden boy, Michael, the obedient son. But you don't know what it's like to fight for survival. I built my life on power, and I won't let some frail old woman and her pet son ruin me." Margaret's voice cut through the chaos, steady and unyielding. "Power built on greed is no life, James. It is chains, and you've bound yourself so tightly, you cannot see the freedom love could give you." "Love?" James spat. "What has love ever given me? Love doesn't pay debts. Love doesn't keep respect. Love doesn't stop people from laughing behind your back." His voice cracked, raw with desperation. "All I have left is this house, and I'll take it, even if I have to drag you out of it." Suddenly, James lunged toward the journal on the table. But Margaret's frail hand shot out, gripping it with surprising strength. "You will not touch this," she said, her eyes blazing. "This is my truth, my life. You may burn paper, James, but you cannot burn what I have lived. For the first time, James faltered. Her voice, filled with decades of strength, cut through his fury like a blade. He stood frozen, his chest heaving. Anna stepped forward, her voice trembling but resolute. Stop, James, please. You're destroying yourself. Stay out of this, he snapped. But Anna shook her head, tears streaming down her cheeks. Number, not this time. I've let you use me, manipulate me, make me lie for you. But I won't anymore. She's right. Greed has poisoned you, and I won't drink it with you. Her words struck like a hammer. James stared at her, betrayed. You're turning on me too? Anna sobbed. I'm turning back to the truth, to our mother, the only one who never stopped loving us, even when we didn't deserve it. Michael moved closer, his voice steady but fierce. It's over, James. You've lost. Walk away before you do something you can't undo. James's whole body shook, his fists clenched, his breath came ragged. For a moment, it seemed he might strike, his rage boiling too hot to contain. But then his eyes darted around the room at Margaret's unwavering gaze, at Anna's tears, at Michael's unyielding stance. His chest heaved as though he was drowning. No, he whispered hoarsely. No, I can't lose. He staggered backward toward the door, his face twisted in anguish. You'll regret this. All of you. You'll see. And then he was gone, the slam of the door echoing like a gunshot. His car roared down the drive, disappearing into the storm-dark horizon. Inside, silence fell heavy. Anna collapsed into a chair, sobbing uncontrollably. Michael wrapped an arm around her, though his eyes remained fixed on the door. Margaret sat still, her hand resting protectively on the charred journal. Her face was pale, her body trembling, but her eyes glistened with fierce light. At last she spoke, her voice low but steady. The storm has not yet passed. James has reached the edge, and desperate men do desperate things. But tonight, we stood as one. For the first time, we stood as a family. Anna lifted her tear-streaked face. Mother, I don't deserve your forgiveness. Margaret touched her cheek gently. Forgiveness is not deserved, Anna. It is given, and I give it freely. That night, Margaret wrote in her journal once more, her hand shaking with exhaustion but steady in purpose. He came to destroy me, but he could not. He came to divide us, but he failed. The house still stands, the truth still lives. And my children, though broken, are beginning to find their way back. Yet James, my poor James, he is lost in his own darkness. The question is not whether I can endure him. It is whether he can endure himself. She closed the book and stared into the fire. The farmhouse groaned softly as wind swept against its walls. Somewhere in the night, James Hayes drove through the darkness, his mind a storm without end. And Margaret knew the final reckoning was still to come. The farmhouse was wrapped in uneasy silence for the next 2 days. Every creak of the old wood, every groan of the wind across the fields felt like a warning. Margaret moved through the rooms with deliberate calm, but her children could see the tension in her eyes. Michael kept the shotgun by the door, not because he wanted violence, but because he feared what desperation might drive James to do. Anna hardly slept, her guilt weighing heavily as she tried to redeem herself with small acts, cooking meals, tending the fire, sitting quietly beside her mother. But Margaret, though frail, carried herself with a quiet resolve. She knew the storm had one more strike left, and she knew she must be ready to meet it. It came late one night. The sky outside was clear, the stars sharp, but the air was heavy with a strange stillness. Michael was dozing in a chair near the hearth when the smell of smoke jolted him awake. "Mother!" he shouted, leaping to his feet. "Anna, wake up!" They rushed to the back window, flames licked at the barn, fire climbing hungrily through the hay. "It's James," Michael growled, racing for the door. Margaret clutched his arm. "No, let the barn go. Don't chase him into the dark. That's what he wants. But outside, the fire spread fast. The glow lit the fields in a hellish orange, and standing in the distance, barely visible in the flicker, was James watching, his face twisted in the light. Michael charged toward him, but James fled into the shadows before he could be caught. The neighbors, seeing the flames, rushed to help. Buckets of water were thrown, hands worked desperately, but the barn was too far gone. By dawn, it was a smoldering skeleton, smoke rising into the gray morning sky. Anna wept at the sight, wringing her hands. The animals, the tools, everything's gone. Michael's jaw was like stone. He's crossed the line. That was no longer anger, that was war. Margaret stood straight, though her body trembled with fatigue. Her voice was calm, firm. Then war it shall be, but not with fists, not with fire, with truth. That afternoon, Margaret asked Michael to fetch the box Robert had hidden in the attic, the one she had never opened in front of anyone. Inside were more letters, deeds, and a will Margaret had kept secret. She gathered Anna and Michael at the kitchen table. "This," she said, unfolding the papers with care, "is Robert's final will. He entrusted it to me because he feared greed would destroy this family. And though I hoped never to use it, the time has come." The will stated in Robert's clear hand, "This farmhouse and all its land shall belong solely to Margaret Hayes for the duration of her life. Upon her passing, it shall pass to whichever of our children has shown themselves most faithful in care and loyalty, as judged by Margaret herself. Should none be worthy, she may bequeath it elsewhere." Anna gasped, covering her mouth. Michael's eyes widened in disbelief. Margaret folded the will carefully. "Your father gave me the power to choose, and now the choice is clear." The next evening, James returned, emboldened by the barn's ashes. He burst through the door, his clothes disheveled, his eyes bloodshot. "You think you've beaten me?" he snarled. "You think one stupid letter, one trial, one night of fire can stop me? Number, that house is mine, and tonight you'll sign it, or you'll lose everything." Margaret rose slowly, holding the will in her hand. "No, James," she said. "Tonight you will lose everything." She opened the will and laid it on the table. "Your father gave me authority to decide who inherits this land. Not you, not the court, not anyone else. Me. And I have decided. It will never be you." James staggered back as if struck. You're lying," Michael's voice thundered. "Number, she's not. I saw the will myself." Anna stepped forward, her voice breaking. "So did I. It's real, James. Father trusted her, not you." James's face contorted, torn between fury and disbelief. "You can't do this to me! You can't just erase me like I'm nothing!" Margaret's eyes filled with both sorrow and steel. "I cannot erase what you've already erased yourself, James, with your greed, your lies, your cruelty. A son who would burn his mother's barn, who would destroy her peace, who would threaten her life, that son has erased himself." Her voice trembled with emotion, but her gaze did not falter. "You are my child, but you will not inherit my legacy. Not now, not ever." The words broke something in James. He let out a strangled cry, half rage, half despair. He lunged forward as though to tear the will from her hands, but Michael intercepted him, pinning him back with all his strength. "Enough!" Michael shouted. "It's over, James. Look at yourself. Look at what you've become." James struggled, cursing, but his strength faltered. Tears filled his eyes as he gasped. I just wanted to matter." Margaret's eyes softened, sorrow piercing through her resolve. "You have always mattered, James. As my son, as my blood, but the house, the land, those were never what made you matter. You refused to see that. And now, it is too late." James sagged in Michael's grip, his fury drained, leaving only a hollow shell of the man he once was. Neighbors, drawn by the shouting, had gathered outside. When Michael finally shoved the door open, they saw James broken and trembling, his reputation destroyed before the whole town. He pulled free and stumbled into the night, his car disappearing down the dirt road, swallowed by darkness. Inside, the three remained in silence. Anna wept quietly. Michael's shoulders trembled with anger and grief. Margaret lowered herself into her chair, the will still in her hand, her eyes glistening. At last, she whispered, "It is finished." That night, she opened her journal, though its pages were scarred and incomplete. With slow, steady strokes, she wrote, "Tonight, the war ended, not with fire, nor fists, nor courts, but with truth. James is gone, broken by his own greed. Anna has returned to me, scarred but healing. Michael stands as my rock. The house still stands as Robert wished it to, and I have kept my promise." She set the pen down, closed the journal, and breathed deeply. The farmhouse was quiet again. For the first time in months, the silence felt like peace. The storm had passed. The farmhouse was quiet again. Too quiet. After weeks of shouting, threats, courtrooms, and fire, the silence felt both foreign and healing. Margaret sat in her rocker by the window, the morning sun spilling across the fields. The barn was gone, only charred wood and ashes remained, but the farmhouse still stood tall, weathered yet unbroken. Michael worked outside, repairing what he could. Anna moved softly through the house, tidying, cooking, sometimes sitting with her mother just to keep her company. The wounds of betrayal were still raw, but there was a gentleness in Anna now that had been missing for years. As Margaret watched her children, she realized something profound. Though James had torn their family apart, he had also, in a strange way, forced them to come together. One evening, Anna sat at the kitchen table, her hands folded tightly. "Mother," she whispered, "I can't stop thinking about what you said, about forgiveness. How do you still love me after I sided with him? After I helped him try to take everything from you?" Margaret reached across the table, placing her hand gently over Anna's point. "Because love doesn't vanish when it is wounded," she said softly. "Love bends, it breaks, but it grows back stronger. You were lost, Anna, but you found your way back. That is enough for me." Tears spilled down Anna's cheeks. She leaned forward, clutching her mother's hands as though anchoring herself. "I don't deserve you," Anna sobbed. Margaret's smile was faint but warm. "None of us deserve love, my child, and yet it is given, freely, again and again." Outside, Michael returned from the fields. He stood in the doorway, watching them. His voice was rough but steady. "She's right, Anna. We can't undo what's been done, but we can build again, together." Anna wiped her tears, nodding. For the first time in years, Margaret saw something like hope glimmer in her daughter's eyes. As for James, word spread that he had left Maplewood. Some said he fled to the city, chasing work. Others whispered that he drank himself into ruin. A few even claimed they saw him sleeping in his car outside of town. Margaret never saw him again, but in her heart, she carried both grief and prayer for him. In her journal, she wrote, "James is gone. I cannot follow him into the darkness, nor can I drag him back. All I can do is love him from afar, pray that someday he will remember who he was before greed consumed him. For he was once my son, the boy who laughed in the fields, who climbed trees, who asked me endless questions at night. That boy is buried deep. Perhaps one day he will rise again." Weeks passed, then months. The barn was rebuilt with the help of neighbors who admired Margaret's courage. Though the scars of fire still marked the land, new beams rose, strong and sturdy. Anna stayed at the farmhouse, tending to her mother, slowly mending the trust she had broken. Michael visited often, his devotion unshaken. Together, they brought life back into the old house. One autumn evening, as leaves blazed gold outside the windows, Margaret gathered them by the fire. "I have something to say," she began, her voice soft but clear. Michael and Anna looked at her, waiting. I am not a woman of wealth. I do not have riches to give. But what I have is this house, this home, this land, this legacy. And when my time comes, it will not pass to one child, but to both of you. Not because of entitlement, not because of blood, but because you have chosen to return to me, to stand with me. Anna's eyes filled with tears. Michael's jaw tightened with emotion. Margaret continued, But remember this, the house itself is not the treasure. It is only wood and stone. The treasure is what it sheltered our laughter, our tears, our struggles, our love. If you hold on to that, then no fire, no greed, no betrayal will ever destroy you. The three of them sat in silence, the fire crackling softly. It was not the silence of fear anymore, but the silence of peace. Anna leaned her head against her mother's shoulder. Michael placed his hand on Margaret's face. And for the first time in what felt like years, Margaret Hayes felt whole. That night, she wrote her final words in the journal. The storm has passed. The ashes remain, but so does the house. So does love. I have seen betrayal, greed, and cruelty. But I have also seen forgiveness, redemption, and strength. If this is my legacy, then it is enough. Let it be known, love, though wounded, endures. Family, though broken, can heal. And truth, though scarred, will always outlast the fire. She closed the journal, set it gently on the shelf, and blew out the lantern. The farmhouse, bathed in moonlight, stood tall against the night. Its walls whispered of storms survived, of secrets kept, of love reclaimed. And within it, Margaret Hayes, her children, and the spirit of Robert Hayes rested not in perfect harmony, but in something far greater, enduring love.